Tuccillio, and I'm the Medical Science Liaison for Jazz Pharmaceuticals. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, my role is to discuss science primarily with physicians. I gather information from them on their experience on what it is like to use medications, and then I give them scientific data to help them use medications safely and effectively. So today, I'm going to talk to you about 5 things to know. It's FDA versus non-FDA approved cannabinoid products. So I'm going to first describe the FDA, standards and regulations, cannabis regulations, and underregulated products, and then what you can do. So let's begin. What is the FDA? The FDA is a governing body for protecting public health by ensuring safety, efficacy, and security of food and drugs. For the purpose of this talk, we're going to focus on FDA pathways for medicines. So there are specific scientific questions that need to be answered for the FDA to approve a drug as a medicine. So we start with animal studies. Animal studies are required first to help test safety before they're trialed in humans. Then we do clinical trials to collect safety information and assess risks. And then there's multiple placebo-controlled studies to assess effectiveness. Once a drug is approved, the FDA continues to monitor for safety by collecting adverse events or side effects data to keep customer protection a top priority. Without this rigorous collection of data, non-FDA approved products are limited in what they can tell us about them. So limited in what they can say about safety, efficacy, what they can tell us about use in more vulnerable populations like children, pregnant women, and elderly. And it's limited in what they know over use over a long period of time. And also what contaminants may be present. So misleading health claims could lead to adverse events. So we know that the FDA protects our health by ensuring safety and efficacy of food and drugs. The FDA is also the legal body that regulates cannabis. So how does it do that? Well, the FDA can issue warning letters and fines on companies that are making misleading claims. So accurate and consistent. So now we'll talk about the FDA standards and regulations and how the FDA expects information to be accurate and consistent. So nobody does research like the FDA. We start with preclinical. Those are our animal studies. So we do that first to ensure safety before testing in humans. Then we go to phase 1. Phase 1 studies are small studies in humans that are healthy. And we're just assessing safety in a small number of patients before we go to phase 2. Phase 2 patients, they actually have the disease that we're trying to treat, and now we are trying the medication in a larger group of people. When we get to phase 3, we have a larger group of patients, again with the disease, and here we're trialing the drug against placebo. So we're comparing it against placebo to see if it's effective. We're trialing it in a larger group of people to see that it's safe. After all of that, they can apply for a drug to be approved by the FDA as a medication. The FDA approves it, and if it's approved, the studies are not done. Then there's post-marketing research where we're monitoring the medication in its use over a longer period of time, again, collecting safety data, adverse events, and all of that. So not all drugs can make it through all of these phases, but this is the standard. And that's a lot of steps. So now I'm going to introduce you to the USP. This is the United States Pharmacopoeia. So the USP is a scientific organization that provides standards on what and how strong a medicine is and decides the information that needs to be on the label. So you've seen this symbol before, it's on your vitamins. So the USP has legally recognized standards for FDA-approved drugs and dietary supplements, which of course include all FDA-approved cannabinoid products. The non-FDA approved products do not have these legalized standards, so there's confusion in guidance on testing and consistency. Because of this, there's no real way to know what is in those products. So I'm not going to call anybody out, but before this talk, how many of you were aware of CBD regulations? Oh, okay, great. Well, most people aren't, so 92% of Americans assume there's full federal oversight and are unaware of their own state's regulations of products. In fact, even healthcare providers are unfamiliar with CBD regulations. So there's various regulatory bodies that help keep products we ingest safe and consistent in quality. There's a list of them on the slide. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to mention the FTC. So the FTC keeps us safe from deceptive business practices. So how do they do that? Well, they crack down on companies that make claims about cannabis without rigorous testing. And then if you go down to the bottom, you can see that there's state versus law, and in that, what we're talking about is that something that may be legal in your state may actually be illegal on the federal level. So what's the point of all of this? Well, it's really just for consumer safety, to keep you and I safe. So to sum this up, an FDA-approved medicine for use in one state is exactly the same as in another state. So you're in California, you have your prescription medications, and you go on vacation, and you forgot them at home, and you're going to New York, you can go to a pharmacy in New York, fill your prescription there, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. Anything that is recalled by the FDA, a food or a drug, is going to be recalled in all states. It's going to be consistent. But for cannabis products, the rules are different from state to state, and it depends on state laws to both set and enforce quality standards. So buying a product in California may be very different than buying it in another state. And then when you buy something online, there's really no rules and regulations. So there can be inconsistencies in purity, content, quality, and labeling. So it's important to remember that the cannabis plant is complex. The cannabis plant contains THC and CBD, which are molecules called cannabinoids. Well, it has a lot more than just THC and CBD. Turns out that the cannabis plant has over 100 identified cannabinoids as well as other molecules. But the key takeaway is that they're not very well studied. So we talk about THC, we talk about CBD, you hear a lot about those two, because that's what we know the most about. But what's collecting in your plants? So this is my favorite part of the presentation. I think you're going to find this very interesting. So cannabis is a bioaccumulator and a phytoremediator. And what that means, a bioaccumulator is an organism. So in this case, it's a plant. And it absorbs a substance quicker into it than it gets rid of it. So it brings it in faster than it can metabolize or eliminate it. So it built up in the plant. A phytoremediator is a plant that's used to clean up the environment from pollutants such as heavy metals or organic contaminants in the soil, water, and the air. So these plants absorb, accumulate, and sometimes break down harmful substances, and they can help restore polluted environments to a healthier state. So in other words, cannabis is used to clean up toxins and other chemical waste from soil, water, and air by absorbing it into itself. So here's a really interesting fact. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, cannabis was used as a phytoremediator to help decrease soil toxicity near the nuclear power plant. So the key takeaway here is that cannabis is highly efficient at collecting heavy metals, toxins, and contaminants from the soil and contaminants found in the air. So what's stopping these contaminants from accumulating in products that people consume? Nothing. What does this mean about cannabis products that are available? Well, these contaminants can be present in any of these products. And what about regulatory oversight? How much testing is done on these contaminants that are being sold with cannabis products? Well, testing is inconsistent and it's not mandated. So there's no guarantee that cannabis-based products do not contain contaminants unless they are FDA-approved cannabinoids. So here is a list of different testing that I think is important to understand in regards to cannabis-based products. So I'm going to just go through them quickly. So biological contamination. So there's a toxic fungus that is known to grow on cannabis. You want to make sure that you can test for that and eliminate it. As I mentioned, cannabis is a bioaccumulator, so pesticides and heavy metals that are in the soil, pesticides that might be used to grow the plant are going to be absorbed into the plant. So you want to test for those. Potency testing, you want to know that this THC or CBD that the product says that it is actually in those quantities in the bottle. And then there's microbial testing to test for viruses or bacteria. And then there's residual solvent testing. So once you have grown the plant, you use solvents to extract the THC or CBD, and then you want to get rid of that solvent because it's harmful in the final product. Okay, so does the FDA mandate this testing, or is it just recommended for cannabis-based products? Well, for FDA-approved products, it's mandated. For non-FDA products, it is recommended but not mandated. Here's another fact. Nickel was over 2.5 times higher in the leaves of cannabis plant when grown in toxic soil near a mine compared with greenhouse growth conditions. Okay, so studies reveal unexpected inaccuracies. In fact, when random products have been pulled off the shelves and tested, we find many labeling concerns. These studies here show the results of labeling inaccuracies for CBD products and also unexpected THC content. So as a reminder, THC is the intoxicating component of the cannabis plant. It's the part that makes you feel high, whereas CBD is not intoxicating. A recent FDA report found that out of 90 products, 55% were mislabeled. So either over or under the listed CBD on the label. So moreover, even though that none of the products indicated that they contained THC, 50% of those products had detectable levels of THC in them. So in short, it seems like products are consistently inconsistent. Levels of cannabinoids differ, and sometimes cannabinoids we weren't expecting are actually found in our products. So there's some good actors out there and there's some bad actors, but without FDA oversight and regulation, we don't know which is which. So what? Well, you probably want to know what you're buying and know that you're not wasting your money. And you probably want to make sure that you're not putting yourself or someone that you love in harm's way. Also, we know that other cannabinoids can have effects on the body, and we want you and your healthcare provider to know exactly what you're taking. So, in this study by the Clean Label Project, this shows labeling inconsistencies and also highlights concerns about heavy metal contamination. So this is a study that tests 242 CBD products for heavy metals, pesticides, and other contaminants. And I specifically want to highlight lead. So the EPA wants none, but requires action if there's 0.15 parts per million or 15 parts per billion of lead in drinking water. So I'm going to repeat that for you. The EPA requires action if there is 0.015 parts per million or 15 parts per billion of lead in drinking water. Now, we talked about the cannabis plant as a phytoremediator, so we know it sucks up whatever is in the soil and in the water. Cannabis plants are used to clean up heavy metals, so they're used for their phytoremediation properties and have been shown to accumulate over 22 parts per million of lead, which is 22,000 parts per billion of lead. Remember, our action point is 0.15 parts per million. So some states are testing for this, and they're requiring under 1 part per million. And that doesn't mean every cannabis product has this much lead in it, but it could. And we don't know which product, from product to product, which contaminants there are and in what quantities. And that's concerning. So if there's 1 part per million of lead in a cannabis product, that would actually exceed one of the highest contaminated water supply samples, the Flint, Michigan lead crisis, by a factor of 10. So why haven't lead and other contaminant levels in cannabis followed the same standards as the EPA does for water? Well, certain states have guidelines, but many don't. And I looked at the regulations for California, and their limit is 0.5 parts per million. So this also exceeds the EPA drinking water action level by more than 3 times, and the Flint, Michigan water crisis by 5. So that limit is according to the state. So it means that all licensed dispensaries are required to do that testing to ensure that that lead level is less than 0.5 parts per million. But it doesn't cover products that are bought in other states or that are purchased online. Also, I can't tell you how well it's enforced because states don't necessarily have the resources it takes to enforce these laws. So of the top 10 brands of cannabis products, they averaged 0.34 parts per million of lead, 34 parts per million. Just one more thing to point out. The American Academy of Pediatrics says there is no safe level of lead exposure in children. Even small amounts of lead in their blood can harm their thinking, learning, and development. At low levels of exposure, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggest getting kids checked and taking action. In short, any level of lead in a child's blood is a worry. There is no safe level. So without FDA regulation, CBD products are highly variable. Not only was there presence of THC in some THC-free products, but some also had toxic elements, including heavy metals. Now I'm going to take a minute to tell you a story about someone named Sam. Sam had epilepsy since he was 4. He suffered about 100 seizures per day. His family tried every available treatment and found no relief. After exhausting all options, they turned to cannabis products. The first tincture they tried reduced his seizures dramatically, from 10 to 20 an hour to about 1 an hour. But the next batch didn't work and his seizures returned in full force. When tested, they found that the tincture claiming to have a 20-to-1 CBD to THC ratio actually had almost no CBD and no THC in it. So the lack of consistency and regulation made it impossible to rely on these products to manage his seizures effectively. So here's a take-home message. Non-FDA approved products may differ in purity, contents, and quality. So what does the future look like for cannabis? Well, the FDA's work to keep high standards and offer rewards to will help decide if we can fully benefit from medicines made from the cannabis plant. So we support a strong and comprehensive regulatory framework. We want to encourage the development of more FDA-approved cannabis products and ensure safety of non-FDA-approved products. We also want the public to be well-informed about the differences between the two. Right now, we're in the middle of the road. So don't be cheated by a miracle cure. So this is an infographic by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and it has some helpful tips before trying alternative medical treatments with non-FDA approved cannabinoid products. So number 1, this is the most important thing. Keep your healthcare provider in the loop in your medical care. This is huge. Talk to your healthcare provider about these products. Stay away from products that promise guaranteed results. You don't know how your body will react to these products, and they haven't been tested or approved by the FDA to make sure that they're safe. So my hope today is that you learned more about FDA-approved versus non-FDA approved cannabis products, and that you feel empowered to talk to your healthcare provider. They are your partner. They really need to know what you and any loved ones that you're caring for are taking so they can help provide the best care for you. Thank you. Do you have questions? Yes. could call the manufacturer, but I don't know if they're going to tell you. I don't know. You know, the other, even if they may be testing it, that's the truth, they may be testing it, but the testing procedures are not standardized. So you, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what services are available for that. I can tell you. There's no way to know really what's in it without having it tested in some standardized capacity, and I couldn't speak to that. Right, but you don't. Yeah, you can't speak to anything that is in there that is not listed on the label, or that what is on the label is actually what's in the label. Any other? Yes.
We came from South America. In Colombia, my daughter was using products, of course, with non-FDA approved, because in Colombia, FDA it doesn't exist. And here, she's taking like Epidiolex, that of course is approved by FDA. So my question is, and I'm glad FDA do all these controls on medicines, but I want to know if the controls are more strict because they are cannabis products, or it applies to the rest of the medicines?
It applies to all medications. So in general, when a drug is approved as a medicine by the FDA, it's always going to be the same. So your Epidiolex will always be the same. It will be the same strength, month after month, bottle after bottle. Okay? If you were on a different medication, it would be the same medication, the same quality, the same lack of contamination with every refill. It would be exactly the same.
Because I didn't know cannabis was absorbing or absorbs a lot of harmful products. So if that happened with the rest of the plants, also FDA take care that the older medicines don't have those
Right. Because it's FDA approved, you can be sure that it's been tested for those contaminants, and those contaminants are not in the bottle that you're giving your child. You're welcome.
We have time for maybe one more question.
Thank you.